Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Chris Bandasi, and I chair the HB 737 Commission for the study of the environmental and health effects of per and polyfluoroalkylated compounds. This is the March 14, 2025 meeting, and we are called to order at 2:03 p.m. with a quorum. First order of business is approval of minutes or acceptance of minutes. I know everyone wasn't here for them, but I'd just like to get them accepted as the regular record of this commission for December 13, January 10, and February 14. So we'll take any comments or a motion. And Gary, I think you're muted, or I'm not hearing you.
I'll move to accept.
Okay, thank you. Second by Ron. Any discussion?
I'm sorry, which minutes are these?
These would be December 13, January 10, and February 14.
I guess if we could do them separately, because I need to recuse on ones where I wasn't present, and then I could approve on ones where I was. Okay. I was only there for January. Andy covered the other two meetings.
Just put it in the minutes. He recused on such and such a date.
Okay, is that acceptable to
Yeah,
everyone?
Chris, this is Nancy. I missed one of those meetings, I think, as well, but I was at the last one halfway through. So we'll have to check the dates just so that I don't mess up the count of approving anything that I wasn't there for.
Okay.
Also, this is Dylan. I was not there for the December or January meeting. I was there for the February meeting, so I would be abstaining from December and January.
Why don't we take these one by one then, if you don't mind, Gary?
Sounds fine.
So beginning with Gary's motion for approval of the December 13, 2024 minutes. It was second by Laureen. Okay. And any, well, all in favor say aye. I'm not sure I see everyone, but
aye.
Any opposed? Abstentions?
I abstain.
And Dylan, Michelle, Michael, Wimsack, right? Anyone else abstaining? Okay. And then how about minutes of January 10, 2025? I'll call for a vote on that. All those in favor, please indicate by raising your hand so I can see them.
Aye.
And
Aye.
any opposed? Abstentions for January?
I abstain.
Joe, Dylan, okay.
Amy abstains.
Amy and Provincial. Okay. And then the February minutes. Same motion by Gary, seconded by Laureen. All those in favor, raise hands.
Aye.
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 Opposed? Abstentions?
Abstain.
Aye. Green and Ron. Okay. I think that's it. Great. I feel like that's a huge accomplishment. Let's see, Maureen, you're here. You've done so much work on keeping track of membership. What can you give us an update? I have your update. I'm very appreciative of all that you've done there. And if not,
sorry about that. Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon, members. I have been keeping a detailed chart, trying to place a name with each of the multiple categories in the statute for this commission. A lot of flux these past couple of months, but I think we have a good handle on who's here and who should be here. So I'm going to start with state reps. The state rep appointees from Speaker and minority offices are myself, Maureen Mooney, Tanya Donnelly, Richard LaSalle, Rosemary Rung, and Wendy Thomas. Those are the state rep appointees. I want to move next to state Senate appointees. Those are Senators Daryl Abbas and Tim Mugg-Yu. I want to move now to the category in statute that says you have to be, quote, a representative from each of the affected towns, and it lists them, appointed by the governing body of such town. According to my documentation, we are missing members in that category from Litchfield and Hudson.
So I am from Hudson, Dylan Dumont here, also a state representative, but was appointed because I'm a member of the select board. So the select board appointed me back in the beginning of February.
Okay, real good. So you are in that category for Hudson. I'll put you in there, Dylan, and I'll send you a link to this chart that I'm working off of.
And one other thing, I believe that if I read that correctly, Hudson actually has two representatives. I believe one of them is a citizen and one of them is a member of the governing body. Is that correct?
Yes, I'm getting to the citizen one now.
Okay. So we had appointed back some time ago in December or prior to that. I was trying to see if he's here. Daniel O'Brien. It looks like he's attending the meeting, but he's not on here as a panelist.
Okay, so let's move to that category. If you don't mind, Dylan, we'll pick you up on that when I get there. That category next, so it calls for 5 residents, one from each of the affected towns, who are members of drinking water related environmental advocacy citizen organizations, which are not affiliated with any government or state agency, recommended by the senators, appointed to the commission, and appointed by the president of the Senate. So I had, prior to this meeting, missing members from Litchfield, Londonderry, Hudson. But it sounds, Representative Dumont, that you're telling me Daniel O'Brien is the Hudson representative in that category?
That is correct.
Okay. So that leaves in that category, according to my calculation, correct me if I'm wrong for the discussion, but that would leave Litchfield and Londonderry. So that, Mr. Chairman, is going to conclude my membership formal reporting and tracking, which is
Ron, something to add?
Yeah, we have a citizen that stepped up 2 months ago, and I'm just waiting on him to get signed off by the Senate. Ray Breslin is going to be the citizen representative for Londonderry. And I'm just trying to figure out where he is in the process of getting signed off.
all right. I will indicate that on my notes as pending. That's for Londonderry. Got it.
And I have Kimberly Queenan pending as a town of Litchfield government appointee. So I can check on the status of that. And if someone can send along Mr. Breslin and Mr. O'Brien's email addresses to me. Gary?
Just checking. I think I'm still on the list as a category as representing the medical society. Is that still a category or?
Yes, it is. So sorry to
Okay.
leave you off.
That's correct, Representative. It's a lonely category, but you are the one in it. Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so we almost have a full roster. I think we really only need a citizen from Litchfield at this point and have names for every other position, which is great. Okay, belatedly, it's time to elect a chair for this year. And as I've said, I'm willing to do it, but I do not want to be responsible for minutes going forward. If somebody taps me on the shoulder, I'm very willing to do it every few months, but I don't want to be in charge of that if I'm going to be chairman.
I'd like to nominate Chris. as chair. I think you've done a great job.
second.
Thank you. All right, appreciate it. Hopefully you'll take care of the second part of my request, but all those in favor, please indicate aye.
Somebody second that nomination?
Aye.
I did.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any opposed? Okay, I know what I'm doing.
No,
from
but
now.
I would just like to mention that this is Wendy Thomas calling in on this number,
Okay,
and I said aye.
thank you, Wendy. And
You're welcome.
all right. Is anybody willing to be in charge of minutes? And I'm not saying do them every month, just tap somebody on the shoulder and say, do them next month, and just make sure that gets done. So,
Chris, I think it probably, I mean, I know because I've done this, I've done it the other committee too, and let's face it, nobody wants to do it because it's so much work. And especially if you're doing it all the time. But if we rotate it, it's not so bad. And I mean, that's what, nobody wants to be the clerk, but we're all busy. But if we do it, I mean, if there's enough of us, and we're going to have, it looks like we have with, the new citizen appointees, and we've got a new town appointee, there will be more of us to spread the work out a little bit. And I don't think it's fair for you, Chris, to have to do minutes on top of chairing, and I appreciate you being willing to do that. So, I mean, I'd be happy to switch off with people, but I certainly can't do it. I'm straight out. I can't do, number one, I'm terrible with anything technology, so it'll take me forever, but I will certainly do it. And if, I would ask maybe if people are willing to switch off.
I'll do May and November.
who said that?
Is that Amy?
Amy.
Amy, thank you.
And I can do June, because I think we're pretty quiet by then in the house.
All right, I can circulate a list offline, and if people will indicate what month they would be willing to take, that's probably workable to do it that way. And
I like the idea of a sign-up list. I think that's a great idea. We can see it and we can plug into it. Great.
okay. Moving right along to our feature presentation, folks. Long-awaited Dr. Romano, Dr. Salas, welcome. We anxiously await your news.
I can't hear you, Michelle.
Are we without sound suddenly?
I think Michelle's calling in.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, for whatever reason, Michelle is muted.
It says Michelle, it says you're self-muted, so I don't know. I think it's on your end. There's no way to unmute.
Is there like a
Oh, and you're unmuted.
Say something, Michelle. Oh.
Are there AirPods that are connected? Sometimes that.
Can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
Ah, there we go. Is it not working? Okay.
No, we can hear you. I think if you mute your self-mute your audio connection on the GoToWebinar, then we should be able to hear you without it reverberating. No, now I can't hear you at all. But if you use your phone, you didn't hang up, did you?
Then actively mute on your computer. Or DES could mute you.
Well, Michelle, maybe Lucas and I should introduce ourselves, and then we can, as much as we would love to hear your voice, so please do call in and we'll get it
Maybe
sorted
if you went
out.
out of the meeting and then went back in, you might clear whatever the issue
Yeah, I
was.
was gonna say just,
I don't think it's muting. I think it's turning your volume down on your computer is probably going to do it, because it's getting an echo with the two different. So I think if you turn your volume down, I don't know if you can hear us though.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, well, can everyone see the slides I just started sharing?
Yes.
Yes, wonderful. Okay. Well then, thank you. Michelle was planning to introduce us, which we appreciate, but I will just quickly introduce ourselves. So I'm Megan Romano. I'm an associate professor of epidemiology at Dartmouth College and Dartmouth Geisel School of Medicine. I, along with Dr. Salas, who is an assistant professor of epidemiology that's joining us today, are part of the team at Dartmouth that have been working on the Merrimack kidney cancer study. My background is primarily in environmental epidemiology, and that's what's brought me to this work. Dr. Salas is a molecular epidemiologist with a lot of experience in kidney and renal disease, as well as renal cancer. And so that's the expertise that he's brought to the project. And I want to thank the chairman and the members for inviting us to be here today. We're really delighted and excited to update you about the work that we've been doing on the Merrimack kidney cancer study. So you are all very aware, I believe, of the overall background that has brought us to this, but just by way of kind of orienting us, you'll recall that we are in phase 3 of a potentially 4-phase cancer concern investigation in partnership with New Hampshire DHHS. The phase 3 feasibility study investigates the elevated incidence of kidney cancer in Merrimack, New Hampshire, following previous analyses that indicated an increase in cases compared to state averages. The purpose of phase 3 is to gather information to see if it is likely that the study will show whether or not the cancer cases relate to a common cause within the community. This study employs a multidisciplinary approach involving a steering committee, a community advisory board. Several of our community advisory board members are here. We appreciate all the work that you do. And a scientific advisory board. Those groups have helped us to guide the design and execution of the phase 3 feasibility study. The feasibility assessment focuses on analyzing kidney cancer data, examining potential correlations with environmental contaminants like arsenic, per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, and trichloroethylene, and engaging with the Merrimack community to ensure the study is responsive to local concerns. Through population-based surveys and community engagement efforts, the study will refine hypotheses regarding the underlying factors contributing to the observed kidney cancer rates and assess the viability of a comprehensive phase 4 study. Ultimately, it is our hope that the research will clarify the potential links between environmental exposures and health outcomes, providing insight for public health initiatives in the region. So this work is overseen by DHHS, including oversight from the Bureau of Public Health Statistics and Informatics Bureau, Prevention and Wellness, and Public Health Protection. Our team at Dartmouth includes expertise in cancer epidemiology, molecular epidemiology, renal health, and environmental epidemiology, as well as research and administrative support. This does include infrastructure like the biorepository at Dartmouth Center for Molecular Epidemiology. And we've also engaged outside experts in qualitative research methods to assist with specific aspects of the overall project. The project includes 4 main pieces: community engagement, cancer registry data analysis, feasibility assessment, and a pilot study. We'll tell you in a bit more detail about the status of each of these components, but I wanted to begin with a bird's eye overview. We conducted community engagement studios and created an online feedback form to gain insight into community concerns about kidney cancer and environmental health issues. The feedback form will remain live through the end of our contract with the state, and we have provided DHHS with a written report of the themes that emerged in our community engagement studio. We'll tell you a bit about those today. The second component of our work is the cancer registry data analysis, which Lucas will tell you about in more detail a little bit later in our presentation. Here we leverage the rich data that are available through the New Hampshire State Cancer Registry to understand patterns of kidney cancer throughout the state of New Hampshire, and to help us focus on whether there was anything unusual about the excess cases observed previously in and around Merrimack, New Hampshire. In addition to this, we conducted a feasibility survey in partnership with the University of New Hampshire Survey Center to better understand willingness of people in New Hampshire to participate in research, what their environmental concerns are, and to understand a bit more about kidney cancer risk factors that are not reflected in the registry data. Finally, the fourth component, which will be our focus through the end of June, is a pilot study, the goal of which will be to demonstrate feasibility of enrolling study participants and collecting data in support of a future, larger, and more definitive study. All right, so with that, we'll talk first a bit about the community engagement studios. Community engagement studios are meetings designed to get community feedback for a cancer research study and offer researchers the opportunity to consult with the population being studied to help improve the research's quality and relevance. They're moderated small group discussions wherein participants are updated on the study background, progress, and plans. Participants are asked for their perspective on the study, issues in the community, and their guidance on improving conduct of the study. Studios were advertised via multiple channels, including social media, posted flyers, newspaper advertisement, and word of mouth messaging from our community advisors. 4 studios took place on June 29th, July 12th, July 18th, and August 7th. And these were strategically organized across various weekdays and weekends, offering both afternoon and evening time slots to maximize attendee availability. 4 community engagement studios were completed. We had 38 discussants overall. The participants ranged in age from 21 to 76. They were on average about 50 years old. 71% were women. And most of the participants were from Merrimack, New Hampshire, about 65% of them, with additional participation from residents of Albany, Bedford, Bow, Concord, Derry, Litchfield, Londonderry, Loudoun, Mason, Nashua, and Portsmouth. And so now I'll tell you a little bit about some of the themes that emerged during the 4 studios. So first of all, we heard about health concerns linked to environmental exposures. Participants across all the studios expressed concern about the health effects of environmental exposures. PFAS exposure in particular came up. They described concerns related to various types of cancers, kidney disease, and other serious health conditions. And another common concern was about long-term implications of environmental contaminants on sensitive populations, in particular children. In our second area of themes, we heard a bit more about interest in research participation. Many of the participants did express willingness to participate in research studies to better understand the health implications of environmental contaminants. Participants wanted comprehensive studies that would not only focus on things like blood testing, but that would also consider factors like soil and water quality, specifically in relation to community gardening and food that was grown locally. And they expressed interest in research that would lead to change or action as opposed to research for science's sake. Some of the community engagement strategies that they suggested to us emphasized the importance of grassroots efforts to engage the community, to advocate for the use of multiple communication channels to reach more people for the study. Suggestions included leveraging social media, local organizations, and face-to-face outreach to ensure that the messages reach as many affected community members as possible. They also gave us feedback on participation and incentives for research. The need for incentives to encourage participation was discussed, with many participants agreeing with proposing financial compensation for blood draws or other contributions. Opinions did vary pretty widely about the appropriate amount of money for such incentives, but there was broad agreement that incentives could help address barriers to participation. There was also a lot of attention paid to the sort of geographic dimensions of this study. Throughout the different studios, there was recognition that PFAS contamination is not limited to localized areas within Merrimack, but could affect surrounding regions as well. And participants expressed appreciation that the studios included representatives from towns near Merrimack, as well as Merrimack itself. They also expressed the need to recognize commuters and those who may not currently live within the Merrimack area. There was a general call for education and awareness across the participants, emphasizing the need for increased community education regarding PFAS and its health risks. Participants highlighted that many people are either unaware of the issues or misinformed about water quality and contamination, suggesting that proactive awareness campaigns could be beneficial. Additionally, we heard a lot about transparency and trust throughout the community engagement studios. It was definitely a recurrent theme where participants expressed apprehension about sharing personal medical information and the handling of sensitive data in a study setting. There was a consistent demand for transparent communication about how data will be used, the confidentiality of the results, and the overall goals of the research. Participants mentioned concern about the possibility of people outside of the study team having access to this information. And so overall, the responses from all the studios reveal a community that's deeply concerned about the health implications of harmful environmental exposures, particularly PFAS. And while participants thought that community members would in theory want to join research efforts, significant barriers to recruitment exist, including the need for more education and publicity to increase effective participation. So we got a lot of really useful information from across those community engagement studios, and we're really glad to have the opportunity to hear from the community. Next, we're going to talk a little bit about our cancer registry data analysis, and so I'll turn things over to Dr. Salas.
Thank you, Dr. Romano. Thank you, everybody, for letting us share some of these results. So our goal with this cancer registry data analysis was to identify significant kidney cancer subtypes and determine whether any unusual patterns emerge in cases from Merrimack, New Hampshire. Before diving into the results, I'll start with a brief overview of how these analyses are conducted to give you some context. So we move to the next slide, please. To calculate the age-adjusted standardized rates, you first need like several pieces of information. You need the age-specific rates of the disease for each population that you want to compare. So this rate shows what the disease rate would be if each population had exactly the same age distribution as the standard that we are comparing. In simpler terms, if you take the real age-specific rates of each population and apply them to one standard age distribution. So a common question is whether the cancer rate in a community is higher than those in other communities or in other parts of the same state. To answer this, we apply these rates to the age distribution of each community to find out how many specific cancer cases you would expect there to be. Once that you have that, you can compare the expected cases to the actual cases that you are observing. This method is often used by state cancer registries to assess cancer trends. One important tool for this kind of analysis is the standardized incidence ratios, or SIRs. The SIRs keep track of how often cancer and other diseases occur. The SIRs are especially helpful because in small towns, the numbers of cases for any type of cancer can be quite low. In these cases, using just the age-specific rates can be highly variable, and that is due to random fluctuations, making the standardized rate less reliable. The SIR help address this problem by using more reliable rates from the entire state to calculate how many cases of a specific cancer might be expected in a community based on the community age distribution. If we move to the next slide, please. So now it's important to understand what an SIR can tell us. We will use an example to illustrate this. Consider in this case an SIR of 1.05, where the observed number of cases is 144 and the expected number based on the state average is 137. So when an SIR is less than 1, it means that fewer cases were observed than expected, which may suggest a lower risk. When an SIR is more than 1, it suggests that we have observed more cases than expected, which may raise some concern. In this example, if we have this SIR of 1.05, suggests that for town A has 5% more cases than expected. This could indicate that something is unusual, that something is happening in that town in relation to the cancer cases, though it also may be due to chance in some cases. So to assess how reliable an SIR is, we can use the confidence intervals. And the confidence intervals will help us determine whether an observed increase or decrease is statistically meaningful. That's why we cannot just rely on just this number isolated, but actually we will require the confidence intervals to be able to consider and interpret the results. So let's dive into the confidence interval. A 95 confidence interval can help us understand how precise our SIR is and whether the SIR is likely due to chance. If we took 100 different samples and calculated 95% confidence intervals for each one, about 95% of those intervals would include the true value of the SIR. However, in real life, we can only take one random sample and create one confidence interval. So the confidence intervals can help us mainly for these three reasons. First, they tell us more than the SIR alone, showing the possible range where the true value is likely to fall. Second, if the entire confidence interval is about 1.0, that suggests that the cancer rate is likely, it's greater than 1, that suggests that it's higher than expected. So when we have that 1.0 as the threshold, the interval could help us to know exactly how precise it is. So while the SIR could be between 1.5 to 2.5, that will indicate us that the expected rate is higher than expected. So it's more likely that that will occur in that specific town. Finally, the confidence interval can also tell us about some uncertainty. So if the confidence interval, for instance, includes the 1.0, then this may indicate that there's not enough evidence to say with certainty whether the cancer rate is higher or lower than expected. So the confidence intervals will give us a better understanding of the reliability of our findings and help us avoid misinterpreting like small fluctuations in data, particularly in small towns that would have lower rates. Now, if we move to the next one. So let's return to our example. So we have an SIR of 1.05. And now let's consider that confidence interval of that SIR. We have a confidence interval between 1.02 and 1.08. Because the entire interval is greater than 1.0, this suggests that the cancer rate is higher than expected and that the result is statistically significant. But now let's consider a different scenario. What happens if we have a confidence interval that is less than 1 or that includes that 1.0? We have a 0.95 to 1.15. Since that interval includes the 1.0, there's uncertainty whether the number of cases is truly higher than expected. In this case, we cannot definitely conclude that the SIR is significantly different from 1.0, which will represent no difference. So the observed variation, again, could be due to random chance rather than a real effect. Finally, one point that is also important is the width of that confidence interval. a narrow confidence interval suggests a more precise estimate, while if we have a wider confidence interval, it will indicate more uncertainty in the data. We move to the next one. So let's look at the interpretation of these SIRs. So if we have an SIR of 1, that means that we are seeing exactly the same numbers between the observed cases and what we are expected to see. However, if we have an SIR that is higher than 1.0, it means that we have more cases than expected. So in this case, if we have an SIR of 1.25, we have 25% higher than expected. Finally, in a town that has a lower rate, so in this case we have an SIR that is 0.75, we could have 25% lower than expected. So let's just recap this very briefly, and let's look at this from both the numerator and the denominator pieces. So when we have 28 cases that are observed and 28 cases that are expected, we will have an SIR of 1.0. But if we have 28 that are observed, but we're only expecting 21, we will have a higher SIR than 1. But if it's the opposite, if we have less cases than what we are expecting, we will have an SIR that is lower than 1.0. Let's move to the next slide. Thank you. So why is it important that we take into account that, that confidence interval and that SIR? And we will use an example of actually what was reported recently. So we have the SIR for kidney cancer in Merrimack versus the rest of New Hampshire that was reported for the years 2009 to 2018. In that case, we have 1.42 and we have a 95% confidence interval between 1.10 and 1.81. However, it's important to understand what does that mean and what does not mean. So when we have an SIR that is significantly elevated, it can tell us that there's a signal that there could be more cases of cancer than expected, but it does not tell us what is the cause of those higher cancer rates. It's just a signal that further investigation may be needed, and it might still be misleading because it might be wrong due to the lower numbers that we are working as small case numbers that can lead to more like a statistical uncertainty. In a small population like those in New Hampshire, assessing the trends is particularly important because those smaller numbers of cancer cases can result in wider confidence intervals, meaning low precision. And when we try to improve statistical reliability, what we do is just to combine data from different multiple years, and that could help us to try to detect those change on the trends and shifts in the cancer rate to following, for instance, any type of event that could raise concern for the population. Let's just move to the next one, please. So let's just recap the results that were observed. So in that analysis, they found that the kidney cancer for this specific population, Merrimack, New Hampshire, was 42% higher than the rest of the state. The confidence interval excluded the 1.0, meaning that the result was statistically significant. And we can click one more, please. This is important because it means that we are reasonably confident that there's a finding of an excess on kidney cancer and that further investigation might be needed. But this doesn't tell us the cause, but it just highlights a pattern. So just to summarize, the SIR tells us whether or not there may be an excess rate of cancer, though it does not tell us anything about the cause of that excess rate. The 95% confidence interval aids with the interpretation. by giving us a range of possible true values and an indication of statistical significance. The overall pattern of results is also important to consider, as there are there several SIRs that are greater than 1 or not? Is there a consistency across the findings that can help strengthen our interpretation? And finally, it's important that we need the statistical expertise for the final interpretation, as there could be many factors that can influence the statistical testing and results. Now let's take a look at the results from our analysis of kidney cancer cases in the cancer registry data. And let me try to unpack this for you. For our latest analysis, we heard some concerns that there were some cases that were missing on the preliminary analysis that we performed for the cancer registry. And in particular, these were cases that were lagged from the VA, and they were delayed in being reported to the New Hampshire Cancer Registry. It's important, though, that even when we are adding new cases, the addition of new cases will affect both the numerator and the denominator, because we are working with that comparison versus the whole state. So with these new cases and this new information, we are able to calculate what are the expected cases for these specific regions. But we also have made a couple of different analyses compared to the previous analysis by the state. We refined our results by separating tumors that were located in the kidney versus those that were located in the renal pelvis. The reason for that is because for the kidney and the renal pelvis, the molecular origin and the potential vulnerabilities for those two different areas are very different. It's different, the cell of origin is different, how the toxicants or how the contaminants or the lifestyle factors can affect those different areas of the kidney, and it's important to understand how to separate those from this analysis. The first finding that is not reflected on the slides is that when we separated the renal pelvis cancers, we did not find any indication of excess cases in any of the areas. The numbers were rather small, but there was no signals observed there. When we are looking only at kidney cancers, we are observing specifically the numbers that are represented in this table. In addition to that, our analysis expanded the time period compared to the previous analysis. So our analysis corresponds to these 4 different time periods: 1995 to 2003, 2004 to 2012, 2013 to 2018, and finally we've added 2019 to 2021. It's important, though, that this last period corresponds only to 3 years, compared to 6 years in all the other periods. And what are our key findings? In red, you can see for the period of 2013 to 2018 that in Merrimack, we confirmed that it's a higher than expected number of cases with an SIR of 1.65 and a confidence interval that was significant between 120 and 220. There were in total 45 reported cases. In addition to that, for the latest period, that is much shorter, only 3 years, in Manchester, we observed 79 cases with an SIR of 1.25. However, as you can see on the confidence interval, they were not statistically significant. The lower number is 0.99, just on the border of that significance. And again, this is important just to be clear about how that could affect both the numerator and the denominator when we are doing these calculations. This updated analysis reinforces the previous findings of elevated kidney cancer cases in Merrimack during that period of 2013 to 2018, while the most recent data for Manchester remains inconclusive at this point. Our analysis includes several additional steps to thoroughly investigate the excess of kidney cancer. First, as I have already mentioned, we have excluded the renal pelvis tumors from our analysis, given that the molecular characteristics and the cell of origin are different. And these allow us to focus specifically on renal cell carcinoma cases, which are the most relevant for this investigation. Second, we conducted a very rigorous review of the reported cases to address the issue of potentially duplicate entries in the cancer registry. Our goal was to minimize double counting while ensuring that we retain cases where the cancer either reappeared a year later or a new cancer appeared on the opposite kidney. By refining our methodology in this way, we aim to provide the most accurate and meaningful assessment of kidney cancer patterns in the region. And if we go to the next one, please, I will hand it over to Dr. Romano.
Thank you so much. So we wanted to tell you just a little bit about the last two components of the work that we're doing. And so the next bit was our feasibility survey. So the University of New Hampshire Survey Center conducted a survey in November 2024 for Dartmouth College to gain insights into New Hampshire residents' views of environmental contaminants, potential health risks, and interest in participating in future research. We had a total of 1,183 members of the Granite State Panel, which is a representative group for adult residents in New Hampshire that completed the survey online between November 21st and November 25th. We did oversample within the 9-town area around Merrimack, New Hampshire. And we asked about several different things in the survey, including concerns about environmental issues and health, kidney cancer risk factors, things like smoking and exercise that were not reflected in the cancer registry data, health history, as well as a number of questions about willingness to take part in a larger future study. And so I just wanted to review those findings from the questions that we asked about willingness to do a future study. So here we show that information from the residents who had ever lived in the 9-town area. The questions that we asked are detailed on the left side of the graph, and the blue areas indicate the proportion of respondents indicating that they almost certainly would or probably would participate in different research activities. And so as you can see here, the majority of individuals indicated a willingness to provide a tap water sample, to complete surveys about their health and lifestyle, and provide their residential history. A smaller proportion, but still a good number, indicated willingness to provide a urine or a blood sample. And we did find that in general, people were less willing to let researchers access their medical records or contact their family or neighbors to be part of the study. And so that's very helpful to us as we're thinking about our next steps for the pilot study and what a future, larger, more definitive study might look like. So our focus for the remainder of the contract will be on this pilot study, and it's important that we're clear about what the objectives of this study are. Our primary goal with the pilot study is to demonstrate feasibility of conducting a larger study and to help us generate hypotheses around possible causes of the observed excess of kidney cancer cases. It's very important to note that the pilot study will not provide any definitive evidence of a cause of kidney cancer, but it will help us to generate preliminary data, which will be critical for pursuing additional funding for a larger definitive study that can tell us more about causes. So we're planning for this pilot study to work to recruit 70 to 100 adult residents of New Hampshire. We'll preferentially enroll participants that reside in or have lived or worked in the 9-town area for at least 12 months. We'll include individuals with and without a diagnosis of renal cell carcinoma. All of these participants will complete a detailed questionnaire about health, lifestyle, and known risk factors for kidney cancer. And a subset of about 20 participants will be asked to provide water samples, urine, or blood samples. So through the end of our contract, we're going to continue to assess the feasibility of conducting a larger study. And although the pilot study findings may shift our plan, the team currently feels that a larger study would likely require a minimum of a 5-year timeline to complete and be on the scale of an NIH research project grant, which is also known as an R01 for those of you that may be familiar with NIH grants. This would include about $500,000 per year for direct research costs. We are casting a wide net to consider potential funders, given that the current climate for federal research funding is very uncertain. We're considering options at NIH, DoD, the American Cancer Society, and we're looking into possible foundation grants as well. The foundation grants are likely to force us to consider a smaller scope of our work. By way of background, and just to get a sense of what this process may look like, the R01 is the original and historically oldest grant mechanism used by the United States National Institutes of Health. It provides support for health-related research based on the mission of NIH. It typically has a 5-year timeline. It does require preliminary data. Some of the other funding mechanisms that we might consider do not necessarily have this requirement, but this is a big part of why we want to use the pilot study to generate that preliminary data so that we're poised to be able to go after this type of funding for a larger study. These applications have an average success rate of about 21% at NIH. Typically, they have to be submitted at least twice. So the success rate is about 13% for a first submission and 33% for a resubmission. The individual success rates are a little bit lower at the National Institutes of Environmental Health Sciences and at the National Cancer Institute, which are the two institutes that would likely consider a study of environmental causes of kidney cancer like this. So those rates are a little bit closer to 12% and 13%. Again, by way of background, and to be sure we're all on the same page about what to expect in terms of timeline, NIH has 3 annual deadlines for grant submissions. And after submitting a grant in either February, June, or October, the first round of review occurs 4 to 5 months after the submission for the standard cycle. Then there's another 4 to 6 months minimum before the project can start, which means that there's a minimum of 9 months from the time of the application submission to the earliest possible start date for funding. It is typical to have to submit an R01 at least twice before it's funded, and we have all unfortunately heard examples of individuals needing to submit 5 or more times before being successful in securing funding. We're being as prudent as we can about how best to package this for success, and we have a great deal of expertise on our team. But it is admittedly a difficult funding climate, and we are currently facing lots of challenges across the biomedical research space. You may have heard that NIH is canceling or rescheduling a lot of study sections and council reviews right now. So we're going to continue to monitor this situation carefully and be as strategic as we can in this evolving landscape of federal funding as we consider our approach. We all remain very excited about this work and highly engaged in being as strategic as we can about how to efficiently move this forward. Many of the faculty at Dartmouth have donated portions of their time to support the changing needs of the project, as we're acutely aware of the importance of the work, and we're all very committed to doing the best that we can for the impacted communities. And so to bring this to a close, I just bring us back to our 4 major components of the project, our 3 that we've really completed at this point with our community engagement studios, although I do remind you that that interest form will remain live. So if people want to submit feedback to the study team, they're welcome to either email us at the study address or use that feedback form. We just completed the cancer registry data analysis incorporating the VA cases. Thanks in no small part to Dr. Salas's work. He's been exceptionally generous in sharing his time and expertise to help us get those VA cases integrated quickly. We received feedback from the community by way of the UNH feasibility survey, and we will continue with our pilot study through the end of the project. We've started the IRB submission process, and so the protocol is pending IRB approval, and we do believe that'll be the focus of the remainder of our time. And so with that, Dr. Salas and I would be happy to take any questions that you may have, and I'm happy to go back to any of the slides if anyone would like to take a look at anything again. I see your hand up.
Hi. Thank you so much, Dr. Rowan. It's nice to see you again.
Absolutely.
And thank you, Dr. Salas, for presenting that. I think your breakdown of SIRs and confidence intervals was perfect. So thank you for bringing that to this group again. In my experience with working with DHHS on the guidelines for release of public health data, they've often considered the number of events of 20 being enough to protect individuals in terms of their privacy, and the potential for constructive identification of individuals in a small sample size, but then also kind of the stability of the rates. And you kind of talk about this a little bit with the confidence interval, but sometimes when we bump into those small numbers, we think about expanding the geography or expanding the years of data. And in this case, we may not be able to expand the years of data because they're not available, but what do you think about that N of 14, contributing to the rate for 2019 to 2021?
Absolutely.
SIRs and confidence intervals aside, the N of 14 was kind of,
Yeah, absolutely. And that's absolutely, maybe if we go back to the slide, Megan, that's a slide.
Oh, that'd be great. Yeah, thank you.
Just to give you some context, one thing that it's particularly important is that for in terms of stability, also we remove everything that was less than 5 cases. Those are the little stars all over the place on the first row, for instance, for Amherst or Hollis and Litchfield, and that's part of that related exactly to that stability that you were mentioning. The other thing, it's just looking at the trends that we have overall in terms of like the cases that we're observing. Particularly well, there will be changes that are occurring because there are many factors that might be changing on the population. 14 is still rather small, and probably that's something that until we do not have 6 years of follow-up, probably I would not feel comfortable really like trying to extrapolate what is exactly happening with that last confidence interval, and even with the number, it's just like a flip of a coin. What would be happening with that?
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, probably one thing that is also important is just to look at the overall cases that have been, the trend that we have in the total number of cases when we look at the different years. And if you look at the trend in general, it's just like the numbers are increasing over time. That doesn't mean that there's an excess rate compared to the rest of the state. That is important, but there's been an increase. And of course, here we just are having a snapshot of 3 years. What's going to happen in the next 3 years? It's difficult to predict at this point, and I believe it's beyond what we can offer to forecast what would be happening in those next 3 years. It's a complex question. Statistically, the other options, and when we are actually representing, this was just for one of the tables. The other tables will collapse this period from 2013 to 2021, just to try to bring everything together. And if we look at the trend, just collapsing all the 9 years, of course, that's statistically significant. But we want to be careful about, we don't know what's going to happen.
Right. And this is not about trying to make the numbers match the story, but it's taking 6 years and 3 years and you find small numbers. Well, of course. Is there any consideration or recommendation to reanalyze these 9 years separately so that they're more balanced? You know, could you take 2013 to 2017, 2018 to 2021, comparing 4 age bands, and then see, you know, the 4-year age bands, you know, so that you're not duplicating the sample, you're not overlapping, but you're taking a more balanced time period and potentially have increased your N, which increases your stability of the rate in this latter period. My concern is that without the backdrop of confidence intervals and the knowledge of, you know, what small sample sizes can do to the stability of your rate, that the narrative could be misinterpreted.
Yes, absolutely. And what are the rationale to select these like breaks in terms of like years? This is not only just to balance like the 6 years, but also this is reflecting also the way that the kidney cancers have been classified over time.
Yeah.
So there are some changes in terms of that classification. That's the reason why even though there's a red number on the first period, I'm not referring so much to that break in what I'm mentioning, because the way that the kidney cancers have been classified over time has changed, and that's been part of the things under the hood that I've been working very hard to try to bring everything at the same level, that we are really comparing apples to apples. And this last period, the classification and the way that the cancer registry is obtaining the information and gathering all that information together, it's more comparable if we have that longer bracket that we know it's not perfectly balanced, but it would be more comparable that if we just like pull everything together. The other thing that we want to be cautious and that we really want to be mindful is that we don't want to rerun the analysis several times, because there's a great chance that we may find other things that are not really related to signals, but just again to chance, because it's like doing the experiment several times. There's always a chance that something will appear by random, and statistically that's not the best practice. That's why we were very careful. The other thing is that in the final report, this will be the only table that will contain these 4 brackets. The other analyses have been collapsed into the 2013 to 2021 for the reasons that I was mentioning in terms of like the way that the tumors were registered, if that makes sense.
Yes, and sorry, Chair, just one more following question for clarity. So just to be clear, so the 2013, 2018 column is the definition of kidney cancer that was used for that analysis done prior. And the 2019 to 2021 does not include renal pelvis.
No. This is just without the renal pelvis. Everything on the table.
All of these numbers presented on this slide are all without. Okay. I thought so, because that's what the title said, but I was just wanting to make sure. Okay.
Yeah. What I refer is mostly that as the physicians and like the people that work in cancer have refined the definition of kidney cancer, the way that kidney cancer was defined on 1995 is a little different to the definitions that we have on 2013 and moving forward.
Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Lori?
Thank you for taking me back to grad school statistics. You're a wonderful, wonderful teacher. I understand what you're doing and how you're presenting this is geared towards our goal, which is the pilot study design and then moving forward for funding. But as I step back from that process, which is excellent and all it can be, you know what you have to do. There's a criteria there that you have to follow. But if I look at community needs, right, with this data, and I look at the visual power of statistics. You know, just descriptive statistics are meant to, at a glance, tell a story. Is there a way that maybe it may not be geared towards, you know, the study application, but it might be helpful for communities to have just a basic graph, you know, that does whatever year you're comfortable with, that you feel you are comparing apples to apples. If you go, it sounds like 2013 on, sorry about the background, I have a heart conditioned animal here distracting me. If you could track it maybe annually, you know, I'm visualing a graph and you say, you know, put a different color for each town and just do the dots from left to right, 2013 to 2021, and just data map the cases per year. And I think that could be really helpful in terms of looking for trends from community to community, and what is the applicability to that. I'm getting to a point is people can maybe tune into their health, right? They can see it and say, oh, gee, maybe I should have that PCP physical that I don't have because I think I'm fine. You know, maybe I need to look at this. Maybe I need to bring this to my physician, and maybe I can look at various things in blood work and get back to that intervention and prevention and early detection. So I'm hoping that maybe we can use this data for that purpose in addition to the goal of pilot study. I hope that's possible.
Absolutely. And of course, part of our goal here is not just to get funding for research. We want just to partner with the communities, because as epidemiologists, our goal is not to just go for the people that are sick, is to prevent cases of people getting sick. So of course, you are completely right. That's part of like the ultimate goal is to bring that information to all the people. In this case, we wanted to get a little more granular with you in this context, so you are able to see first, how can we compare this to the previous analysis and whether or not that signal was still present. And second of all, it's just not to get a step forward, also in terms of like that characterization. One thing that I keep highlighting is the difference between what is a cancer from the renal pelvis versus a cancer from the kidney itself. So the differences in terms of the origins, the difference in terms of like the vulnerabilities, the lifestyle factors, the environmental factors that could be related to that are very, very different. And that means that there are things that can be done, that can be used in terms of like lifestyle prevention and things that you can do just to try to improve or prevent certain things. And there are things that are a little more general, of course, when we are thinking between renal pelvis and the renal cell carcinomas. But you are completely right, and that's something that is on our agenda.
Good.
Lucas has done some nice graphing of the age-specific rates, which I think would probably be what we would want to present as opposed to the case counts, because I think the case counts can be misleading if they're not in kind of the context to the overall population. But and I think, Lorene, we'd love to, I think, talk about that more with the community advisory board too. What would be, you know, helpful to report back to the community.
And maybe add a question there. I don't know how closely people look at their blood work, but I follow mine pretty closely. I always make sure they add in the liver enzymes every time and all these things, because I know the literature. So, you know, when we look at this whole category, there are things we can do with this. Funding is funding. You know, I think you have a strong, you'll have a strong application. So your statistics of acceptance could be higher. Optimistically, I think they will be. But then again, we don't know, you know, what's going on there overall. But we can do things like this, even in the whole broad category of kidney. I don't want to necessarily call it disease, but kidney wellness. You know, when you look at things like the BUN and the creatine, and you say, and then the ratio, you know, it's very confusing to people. But when they are irregular, there are different reasons for that. And what struck me over the last 8 years when I look at mine, which has been in different directions, PFAS doesn't behave itself in blood work, I can tell you. And then I look at the, you know, the differences between liver, heart disease, thyroid, and kidney functioning. And you guys know this, it's all the overlaps, and whatever the cause is, it's all together because my body is full of PFOA and a slew of other ones. So this could be very helpful to people in terms of helping them understand a system of the body that they can actually potentially heal parts of it, because that blood work doesn't necessarily lead to kidney cancer. As you know, it couldn't be a signal, it may not be, but there are some things we can do to heal. And to me, that's what, you know, is so important here, that we don't want to lose sight of helping people heal as best they can. Thank you.
Gary.
Yeah, thanks. And I think you may have touched on this a little bit earlier, and I may not have picked up on it properly, so my apologies if I'm asking the question again. But looking at the numbers here are just showing the incidence of renal cancers, and that's information which is good. We're trying to, in this commission, trying to relate it to a geographic area, and some of your data points out the different towns. But by the same token, and this is my question, I think that you may have touched on, and I didn't get the full benefit, but is there previous history to these towns? How much time did, say, in 95 to 2003, the people in Hudson, did they live there their whole lives? Or did the people in Hudson live half of their life in Atlanta, Georgia? And similarly, where there may be a crossover that goes a thread from where they spent their time, not just where they lived at the time of the survey. And that may be too granular, but I think you mentioned that in passing. So could you expand on that a little bit again?
Sure. So, and Lucas, feel free to jump in here. So the data that we're showing here on this particular table, Gary, this is all data that's collected from the state cancer registry. And so that's going to reflect the time, or where people were living at the time that they were diagnosed with a cancer, because that's the way the registry data is collected. And you're keying right in on the point of why we can't use the cancer registry data alone to answer this overarching question of what are potential causes of this excessive kidney cancer that we're observing. And so part of what we are planning to do in our pilot study, which is the portion that we're working on now, is to request a residential history from people so that we get that fuller sense of, the town that you currently live in, have you lived there for 50 years or 6 months? And where were you living before that? And part of what's tricky about this, of course, is that, you know, it isn't where you lived yesterday that causes your kidney cancer that gets diagnosed today, right? It's probably 10, 15 years ago. Certainly there's, you know, reason to think that if these are environmental exposures, that there's some degree of chronic exposure over time that's happening. And so that we want to be able to think about the sort of cumulative time that people have spent in different places. And so that is something that we'll be able to get at a little bit in the pilot study, and certainly something in a larger, more definitive study that we would address in more detail.
I have a question. This is Nancy.
Hi, Nancy.
Hello. Thank you. Thank you for that great presentation. Is there a way that we can get a copy of that? Can you guys email it to us? It's phenomenal, and it's a great, the great reference tool. So that was one request, and the second one is, if it was around the SIRs, if the expected cases versus observed cases, we're comparing ourselves to other communities in the same state. But my question is, what if, like, you know, our state has higher rates of cancers to begin with than other states, or our communities have, I don't know, maybe higher environmental exposures to PFAS than other communities, and we so we're comparing ourselves potentially to other places that are already high, so we don't look so high. Does that get sort of filtered out? Is that through the confidence interval, or how does that get addressed? I mean, if somebody's comparing themselves to us, they may look good because our numbers are higher. So, but that doesn't mean their numbers aren't real. That there's not in my mind, that wouldn't necessarily mean that there wouldn't be some statistical significance in the rates that they have. But if you're comparing a community to a community that is elevated to begin with, and that's the community that you're comparing things to, it just would, I don't know, it would confuse me how you would sort of filter that out. How do you?
Do you want? I can take that. Well, thank you again for your question, and that's something that is important. Whenever that we are trying to do this analysis and try to use any type of like reference population, we're trying to bring like the population that is closer to that population that we're trying to compare. In this case, that's the reason why we selected New Hampshire instead of the whole US or America or like Northern Hemisphere. The reason is because what you want is just to bring like that population that has some characteristics that could be shared. There's always that potential problem, as you were mentioning, that some of the population or part of the population that you are comparing against could have certain vulnerabilities or certain exposures that make them a little different. However, when we are comparing versus the whole population, including those that are unexposed, most of those things statistically are what we call regression to the mean, because this will be average. Most of those effects that we could see in smaller pockets of population that are exposed, probably those will be wiped out, or they will be just like very close to the mean of the larger population that are unexposed. Said so, of course, if there was like a large bias, let's say that all New Hampshire is a problematic area in terms of like higher incidence overall of kidney cancer or any other disease, that the comparison could be less fair, and that's something that would be taken into consideration to be able to do that comparison apples to apples. It's important though, we should not try to use necessarily like a larger population or larger number of populations if it will include a lot of like heterogeneity or people that might not represent that group that we are comparing against. So if we were comparing what is happening in Merrimack, New Hampshire versus the largest US population, potentially that would not be a good representation of what is really happening, and probably the numbers could be shifting in unexpected ways because of that heterogeneity. I hope that answered your question.
Thank you, Dr. Salas. I appreciate it.
This is Wendy Thomas. Do you hear me?
Yes, Wendy.
Okay, I've got a question, and I've raised this before. Just as Gary was concerned about people living outside of Merrimack and then moving to Merrimack, there's also the concern of people who have lived in Merrimack for a long time, like my next door neighbor, who have moved away from Merrimack and have died from kidney cancer, or who currently have kidney cancer. I know there's no easy way to gather that kind of information, but I suspect the numbers could be even higher than what you're seeing. How do you account for that, or how do you, I don't know, make peace with that?
Yeah, no, it's a good question, Wendy, and it's an important question. And I will say it's a broader issue in cancer epidemiology. It's not specific to our little study here and what we're trying to work on in this particular context. There are a handful of things, that we do have in place where, we do get reports from Massachusetts, for example. So if we have New Hampshire residents that are receiving their care in Massachusetts, we are getting information about those cases that are reflected in the cancer registry. We do also do, you know, cross-referencing. I shouldn't say we, the cancer registry does cross-referencing with the National Death Index. So if someone was living in New Hampshire when they were diagnosed with kidney cancer and then moved away to get treatment at the Mayo Clinic, or, you know, went somewhere else, and then they later die from the cancer, that would be reflected in the sort of death index information that we receive in terms of the cancer mortality data that we get over time. But you're right that if somebody, you know, say lived here for 10 years and moved away to another state and was diagnosed with cancer, at that point in time, we wouldn't necessarily be able to capture that. And I think it's a challenge in cancer epidemiology research in general. It's not there are not easy ways to capture those populations and the populations that are more mobile. And so I think it's an important point of interpretation and consideration for us to try and understand, you know, that there could be cases that we're not capturing from people that did move away. I don't know if Lucas, do you want to add anything? Or?
No, I just want to highlight something that is important, not so much for this analysis, but mostly for the pilot study. And this is something that we want to plead to all of you, is that, of course, most of like the results that we can get from the pilot study and from a later, like larger study, it would depend on people participating on this type of research studies. So unfortunately, if there's like some hesitation or people are concerned about what would be like the good of participating in that research, there would be always like biases, and that's something that we face every single day. We're trying to address that. We're trying to get to the population that are vulnerable, because knowing what is happening with them, understanding what are like the factors that drive all that cancer could make a difference, not only for them, but also for the general population and the future generation. So that's something that, beyond your question, I just want to bring that point together and bring that to all of you, because it's important.
Other questions? I think that kind of brings me to a question about recruitment for the pilot study and how organic the team would prefer it to be, rather than people that get recruited or recommended who may have specific health issues.
Yeah, we're planning to, I mean, we're planning to cast a wide net. You know, we are still waiting for our IRB protocols to be approved, and so part of that will be our recruitment strategy. But we did speak quite a bit with our scientific advisory board about this, and got some really great recommendations from them. And so we are going to come out to community events as much as we can. So if anyone has big events that are coming up in your communities and you would like to see us there, please let us know about that. And we will send Kendra out. She was at a couple of events earlier this week in Bedford and Merrimack, and just getting information out about the fact that we will be launching the pilot study and trying to drum up some early interest, so that we can get rolling as soon as we have participated. I do think it's really important that we can show that we can get 70 to 100 participants, which is our target here for this pilot study. And so the things that, had worked well for getting folks into the community engagement studios were putting posters and flyers and things in town halls and in the libraries. We can do some word of mouth, I think is great. Getting information out from folks on this commission, from folks on our community advisory board. You know, we're prepared to do newspaper advertisements and web advertisements again, as well as we're trying to get permission to do some sort of blanket mailings to different parts of the impacted towns. And so part of what we want to see is what works for recruitment. I mean, that is actually one of the things that we're trying to understand in this pilot study is how do we reach these particular communities and reach folks to participate, and that helps us understand the feasibility of doing a larger study too. So I think that answers your question, Chris, but I'm happy to, to circle back if you have any clarifications or.
Yeah, I mean, for myself in Bedford, we have an area of town that was served by MVD, most likely wells 4 and 5. If there was an effect to be demonstrated in the town of Bedford anywhere, it would be in those neighborhoods. One of them has a strong neighborhood association, and you know, my own inclination, if it would not be contrary to the objectivity of the pilot study, would be to ask that homeowners association to spread the word. Is that
I think that's a great suggestion.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you, Chris.
okay?
Don?
Don?
Yeah, thank you. Just thank you for this presentation. It was very informative. You're probably aware of this, but I just wanted to make sure in case you weren't. One of the slides that you put up there, it looked like there was a survey done asking questions about what people would feel confident in divulging information. One of those questions was, would they be willing to allow a water sample to be taken from their home? Obviously, I don't know if you're aware, but since 2023, the Merrimack Village District water system, you won't find PFAS anymore in the drinking water samples from those customers if anybody gets sampled. And if you are looking for information prior to the 3 treatment plants that MVD built went online, I believe it was between 2020 and 2023, but we've got raw water data back from 2016. So if it's important, that question I think would be more important about what was the water they were drinking in that bracket of time that you're evaluating. MVD has all of that data, but I just wanted to make sure you were aware that's, you know, since I think it was March of 2023, all of our water has been treated. So, you know, taking a water sample of MVD's system now is not going to be meaningful. Certainly private wells, and maybe that's what you were relating to more, was private wells. I think that's.
Yeah, and I apologize. I don't think I said that, but the plan is to sample from private well users specifically. Right. We do have access to a lot of the MDD data, and the folks that we've been working really closely with New Hampshire DES also. And so their environmental monitoring database, there's a handful of data that's available there for water sampling that they've done for a number of different things throughout the state. While we are certainly interested in PFAS, we are also interested in arsenic and trichloroethylene in water, which are also things that are potentially linked to kidney cancer. And I think we're trying to be a bit agnostic at this point still in terms of what may be the underlying cause of this excess of kidney cancer that we're seeing, and to also entertain the possibility that it could be a combination of factors, that it's not just a single one of these things working alone. And I think in this phase in particular, we've been really focusing on casting a wide net so that we are not missing suspects as potential causes. And then moving into, you know, something that would be a larger, more definitive study, we'll refine our hypotheses down a little bit more based on kind of what we find in this stage and what we might find from any biological specimens that we're able to collect or water sampling that we're able to do. We have Kendra Hayward, who's our research coordinator, and we have a health equity scholar intern named Hope Hall, who's been working really closely with New Hampshire DES to summarize the data that are available through DES in their environmental monitoring database as well about those, I think it was arsenic, cadmium, uranium, PFAS, and trichloroethylene that we were most interested in getting information about, but also talking to the folks at DES who are, just a wealth of information about things that are going on throughout the state in terms of environmental contamination.
Good, glad to hear that. Thanks.
Can I this is Nancy again, just one thing that I wanted to add. I remember back, I was fortunate enough to be part of the biomonitoring study back a while ago. And I remember raising the issue after the fact that we were, I think part of the questions were, how much water do you drink and those kinds of things. But within that study, what was missing was a place for people like me to say, yes, I may have drank the water till whatever, 2018, but once I knew, I stopped drinking our bottled water and installed filtration and that stuff. But there was no place that you were able to figure out, well, my drinking water consumption was different, or my levels may have been a little lower because by the time this happened, I had been drinking filtered water for a while. So the numbers, there was no place to reflect that change in habits for the community. And there were a number of us that, a number of citizens that were paying attention and made those kinds of changes. So it's just things like that I think we need to remember to when we're looking at citizens and their reporting and
Nancy,
things like that.
This came up with the steering committee and the scientific advisory board when we were thinking about the pilot study. And so part of what we will ask about in the residential history is information about, was it a private or public water source, and then also about use of filtration or bottled water at each of those residences and the amount of time. So I am cautiously optimistic that we will capture that information for the pilot study.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you, Megan.
Thank you for the suggestion.
Any other questions? If not, I want to thank Drs. Romano and Salas for spending your Friday afternoons with us. This is tremendous information, and we look forward to the continuation of the study and conclusion in June. And best of success in funding for phase 4.
Thank you again for inviting us. We're glad to be here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So we'll just continue to wrap up the DHHS part of our presentation now.
Can you hear me okay now?
Yes.
I switched over to my phone. So, and I just want to apologize to the commission members and to our wonderful guests, Dr. Salas and Dr. Romano, for my technical errors this morning. This afternoon. I'm not quite sure what's going on with my computer. We had a Windows upgrade, so perhaps that's it. I'm not sure, but I'm here on phone. So I will just provide a quick update on where the department is relative to the analysis of other cancers. So DHHS received feedback from the commission and community members regarding an interest in having the department analyze additional years of cancer registry data for other types of cancer other than kidney cancer. At this point, the department has agreed to update the appendix table that was in the Cancer Incidence Report Merrimack that we previously released with the most recent registry data through 2021, consistent with the Dartmouth work. And this will include cancer types other than kidney or renal cancer in Merrimack and the 9-town study area compared with the rest of New Hampshire. The current cancer registry data for the years 1995 through 2021 will be used in this analysis. The department is in the process of finalizing the timeframes for the analysis. The VA cancer data became available on February 11th, and DHHS will incorporate the VA data into this analysis. And based on the availability now of this VA data, it will likely be a few months until DHHS can complete the data analysis. And I will certainly keep the commission updated each month on the progress, and we will be able to present the findings at a future meeting as well, once it's complete. And that's all that I have. I will submit the written ones, which included some of Dartmouth, but since they did such a great job with their presentation, I won't read those over to you guys.
Right,
Happy to take any questions if you have them.
Any questions? Okay. Yep. Right. Thank you.
Thank
Can we, Mike, have the DES update now?
Sure, happy to do that. So let's hit the highlights here. Obviously, as always, you'll get a full accounting, full copy of the update. As far as the air permit goes, of course, that they've requested to have that terminated, and we just need to get their final reporting and get them to submit their emissions fees, and then that air permit would be terminated. With regard to the facility closure, we continue to complete periodic site visits to the facility condition, and we receive updates on the closure activities. Initial demolition permits pertain to that lower bay portion of the building and the ancillary structures associated with the facility, and the demolition work associated with those structures has been completed. A demolition permit for the high bay portion of the building was obtained in January of this year, and as of March 5th, about 50% of that high bay portion of the building has been dismantled. Saint-Gobain has indicated that the final 1/3 of the building will take the longest to dismantle, as that area consisted of multiple working floors for office use. The company indicated that structural steel will be removed and go off as scrap steel for recycling. Demolition debris from portions of the building significantly impacted by PFAS contamination will be disposed of in an out-of-state hazardous waste landfill. And the company is planning to remove the entire above ground structure, leaving only the concrete floor and foundation. And as has been discussed here, they've been scarifying the concrete floor surface to remove superficial contamination, and removed about 1/8 to 1/2 inch in concrete in areas where the application and coatings were performed, and they anticipate completing all demolition activities during the 2025 calendar year. We've requested that Saint-Gobain provide periodic status reports to us, and we received a January demo update, a February update, and a March update, and there'll be links to those in the notes that you get for the meeting. We'll continue to remain in frequent contact with them and conduct the periodic site visits as this decommissioning continues to ensure that we're keeping a close eye on what's going on. With respect to POET systems, as of early this month, March 4th, 690 POET systems have been installed in the towns impacted. As I think you all know, Saint-Gobain is responsible for confirmation testing of the performance of those systems. And we got a work plan for that that's been being implemented. And due to the requirements of the work plan, there's approximately 669 POET systems that are considered officially complete. And that's because there's still, that number's less than the 690 because those remaining, 21 systems are still going through their confirmation testing before they're declared complete. And let's see. If we go to the rebates, the POET system rebate program that Saint-Gobain is implementing, they indicated to us, these numbers really haven't changed from last month. They received approximately 35 requests for reimbursement. Those were reviewed for eligibility back in the fall. They notified residents of their eligibility status in February of this year, and the letters provided directions on how to get payments for those. And the company has most recently indicated that those payments have all been issued to the eligible properties. And we periodically receive inquiries for the rebate program, and we forward those requests along to Saint-Gobain as we receive them. Regarding the waterline construction work, that work continues to proceed in Litchfield, Bedford, and Merrimack. And the construction associated with the Hillcrest Road area in Litchfield, where we've talked about for a number of meetings here, has been substantially completed, I'm happy to report. Some final paving and restoration work will be performed in the spring of 25. A total of 55 residences have been disconnected from their water supply well and are now receiving water provided by the utility. The utility has indicated that 32 properties declined connection to the water line. 14 of those opted to have a line extended from the curb stop area to the house, but not to connect. 10 residences did not respond to notices by both the utility and DES, and 8 residences provided a response indicating that they declined to be connected. The utility installed a curb stop in the street at those 18 locations, and Saint-Gobain will be notifying the 87 owners in this area that bottled water deliveries will be discontinued in April of this year. That's consistent with the procedures that once you've been provided with a connection to alternate water or you decline that, then the bottled water delivery ceases after that. The contractors started completing service connections to existing water mains in the towns of Bedford and Londonderry last year, and service application requests have been sent to 33 eligible properties, and completed applications were received for 30 of those. Exterior service lines have been installed at 26 locations, and water meters have been installed at 22 properties. Exterior work is currently on hold, and the remaining exterior service lines will be installed later this spring when the roadways are reopened for construction. Of course, most folks know that during the spring thaw, a lot of roads get closed down to heavy truck traffic because they get damaged when they're pretty vulnerable during the spring melt. So interior service connection is anticipated to continue on those into winter of 25. Saint-Gobain's consultant finalized design packages for extensions and connections to water mains in the Merrimack area. The Wildcat Brenda Lane service connections began construction late summer of last year. The water main extension on Brenda, John, and Edward Lanes has been installed. Testing is completed, and service applications have been received from all 26 eligible properties. Exterior service line connections are complete, and interior water meter installation work has been completed at 21 of those properties. The remaining water meters and restoration tasks will occur through the spring of this year. Connections to existing water mains in Merrimack and Bedford began back in July of 24. The contractor installed the service line from stop to end at 31 locations. Water meters have been installed at 8 locations in Bedford and 14 locations in Merrimack. A total of 6 properties have not responded to application requests in those areas. And the company is working with a utility in the town of Londonderry to evaluate the feasibility of water line extensions in the town. And of course, we've talked about that. That's the area where the most work is yet to be done. There are about 350 properties that have been proposed by Saint-Gobain and accepted by us for connection to a water line. That, to I think everyone's disappointment, that negotiation between the town of Londonderry and Saint-Gobain and DS has really lingered. I'm happy to report that we just recently had a meeting in Londonderry with Penn and Chuck where we got, I think, all the information we need to really kind of land the plane on those negotiations with the company. So the hope is that in the next several weeks, we'll be able to arrive somewhere. And I would hope that if not for the April meeting, perhaps for the May meeting, I'd have some better, more definitive news to tell you about on that. But we're hopeful that we're getting to a place where we can actually get that done. So we'll look forward to reporting something more concrete in the near future. If we go to the issue of long-term monitoring, as we've discussed previously, Saint-Gobain has proposed to conduct long-term monitoring of drinking water wells under a work plan in the consent decree area. A work plan outline was received back in June of last year, and DES provided approval with comments in July. In September, they Saint-Gobain submitted a groundwater management zone work plan. We met with them in October to discuss that plan, and then we provided preliminary comments on the schedule of monitoring. And based on that, Saint-Gobain submitted a revised work plan in December of last year. We reviewed that revised work plan and provided approval with comments on January 15th of this year, and there's a link to that letter in the notes. And so in general, the revised work plan proposes to conduct sampling so that by the end of 2026, there will be 6 PFAS sample results for each property that's eligible for sampling. So that is really going to be helpful. That's going to give us some time data and some trend data and some repeat data to really make some appropriate decisions about where the groundwater management plan ought to be and what it ought to look like. We have periodically been receiving updated proposals from the company to remedy additional water supply wells within the consent decree following our initial agreements back in 22. And we're up through term sheet 23, or attachment 23, which is a link to that is included will be included in the notes. We received and reviewed that in January of this year, and the attachment includes an updated list of remedies for all properties since the original 2022 proposal. We anticipate that the next proposal will be submitted later this month. On water supply sampling, Saint-Gobain has presented a work plan, as you all know, that with up to 18 addenda, and that for water supply sampling. The GMZ work plan that I discussed above, really kind of supersedes that plan. And so now we have, as of March 11th, the company has resampled approximately 190 properties that were eligible for monitoring under the revised work plan. They anticipate sampling approximately 200 properties per month to meet the requirements of that work plan. And they'll be submitting bi-monthly status reports to us on the sampling effort starting later this month. So properties that exhibit exceedances of a drinking water standard will continue to be issued bottled water eligibility letters and will also be identified in the monthly alternate water status reports that we receive from the company. Previously unsampled wells. So as we've reported before, this isn't really changed, but I'd like to go over it. DES has consistently expressed a need for that additional sampling addendum to complete sampling of all the wells within the CD area. The company has continually declined to sample those homes, citing the distance from the facility and the potential presence of other PFAS sources. So as a result, DES conducted sampling at the remaining homes within the outer boundary of the consent decree where Saint-Gobain did not agreed to sample. And between March of last year and March of this year, we sampled approximately 86 residences, and we received results for all properties. Of the results received, about 22% of the properties exhibited an exceedance of the current New Hampshire ambient groundwater quality standard, and 70% exceed the newly promulgated, it's not new anymore, but the EPA MCL. And so approximately 66 property owners have not responded to the sample invitation, and 1 declined sampling. So we've notified eligible residents by mail 3 times, and we don't plan to send out any additional mailers, but we'll continue to respond to any requests that we get and to do that sampling. I do want to note here that we do have concerns that, and maybe some of you may have seen this in the news. As you know, the current federal administration is taking a very close look at any regulations, environmental regulations that were passed within the last year. We understand that as a result of the lawsuit that was filed related to establishing the 4 part per trillion MCL for PFOA, and that was put in place last May, that the court essentially was asked to hold off on that suit while the agency, while the administration reviews that rulemaking. So I do believe, I don't have anything to report to you. I don't know anything more than you all might know from just following the news, but I just wanted to report to this group that there's a question about what might happen to that federal MCL standard. So we're, as you can imagine, we're watching that very closely to see what transpires. So with regard to the statistics that I usually provide, those have not, we're now getting bi-monthly status reports from St. Cobain instead of monthly. So we don't actually have anything new from the January 29th report, which was reported during the last update. So just quickly, again, those numbers unchanged from the last report. 3,868 properties were identified for sampling. 3,856 access agreements were sent, but running at about a 73% return rate at this point. 2,578 samples have been collected from water supply wells. 1,211 second samples have been collected from wells, and 1,183 properties have been offered bottled water. So that again, those numbers have been contained in the summary that you get with the minutes. And then lastly, the site investigation, we continue, you know, I think we've been some frustration about the delay in getting to a wrap, but actually I think the wrap, we met with them in November of last year, and they've indicated they will submit a wrap addendum that further evaluates remedial alternatives to reduce contamination at the site. They've identified data gaps that need to be addressed to respond to the comments that we provided, and in order for them to prepare that revised wrap, and we agree with that. So they anticipate submitting a work plan in the second quarter of this year, so sometime between April and June, that would identify the objectives and the scope of that supplemental investigation. And we will look at that as promptly as we can, try to get that additional work going as promptly as possible. And then the rest of the update will have the usual graphics that show the progress. I mean, for a long time, we didn't have a lot of progress on some of these things, but I'll let you look at them when you see them. But overall, if we look at all the towns involved, over 92% of the proposed POETs have been completed. So that's encouraging. And in particular, in most of the towns, it's well over 90% completion rate for those. The only one that's missing is Merrimack, but that's actually a relatively small number. Of the end number there is very low. So those are 75%, but I think it's just 3 or 4 that are still waiting for POETs. And then as far as water line connections go, I'm happy to report that Litchfield is reported as 100%, which has been a long time in coming. So that's encouraging. And then of course, the one that it's not quite a goose egg, comes in at 3.4%. That's Londonderry, and that's because that huge chunk of 350 has not been resolved yet. But once that gets online, I do want to manage expectations on that. I'm hopeful that we're going to get to an agreement that's going to allow that project to go forward. But based on the conversations we've had with the utility, that is a very big project. It will probably take, it'll be done in chunks, and it'll probably take on the order of 3 to 5 years to get that. Everybody that's involved, finally, the water line the main constructed, all the lines on the streets constructed, and then the actual connections to the homes and putting them on water. So some will get it much sooner than that, presumably, but at the very end, it may take, it's a big project, so it's going to take some time. But anyways, I wanted to just give you that. I know we're running short on time, so I'll shut up.
Right. Questions for Mike?
Yes, I have a question.
Okay, go ahead, Wendy.
Okay, it's Wendy Thomas. Mike, yes, along with you, I'm also watching what's happening in DC with the EPA, and it's just terrifying. But my question was, you mentioned that in the destruction or the demolition of the building, they're sending material to be recycled. Is spreading PFAS through any kind of a recycling program, has that ever been raised as an issue? Is it an issue? Is that a concern?
I think really the only thing that's being meaningfully recycled is the steel. And I think that the good news about steel recycling is that it goes through a very intense heat process when it gets reprocessed. So I think that we don't have a lot of concerns about that. Most of the materials of the building are going off, you know, the areas that are most exposed to PFAS will likely be going to a hazardous waste landfill out of state.
Okay, thank you.
Lorraine, go ahead.
Just a brief commentary. I was by there the other day. There's a newer, maybe snow is over it, so it might not be new, but there's a huge pile of stuff, like kind of to the left of the drive, I believe, that wasn't there maybe in January, probably last time I was by, with all kinds of stuff, earth, stumps, grassy, twiggy, sticky stuff. Just, you know, it's a decent pile. So I just want to bring that to your attention. Maybe you know about it, maybe isn't. I don't know if it's there waiting for pickup, but it's just kind of really haphazardly piled. It's not a neat, you know, that site, regardless of the toxicity and, you know, how we feel about that lots of residents are talking about. It's been managed in a visually neat fashion, and that is, I don't know what's going on there. There's a whole bunch of stuff right there close to the road.
You're seeing that right near the main road?
You can see it very easily. I didn't even try because I don't want to look over there. You know, I'm driving by and I see, oh, what the heck is that? Just a big pile of whatever it is. Like you were raising a site and piling up in terms of roots, trees, and everything.
Yeah, and it's possible it could be related to development that's not on their property, but I don't personally know, but I will tell you, Andy has been there with some frequency to monitor this. I can check with him.
Yeah,
that's something he's observed.
Just in the last month or two. It wasn't there in January. In the end of January, I know I was near there, but it's kind of a mess. Just curious.
See if I can find out.
Don, go ahead.
You know, from all of the descriptions that you just gone through with the amount of time and effort that the DES is putting into all this is remarkable, and it has been for many years. And I just got a basic overall question. A lot of that reviewing of Saint-Gobain's materials, you know, the various work plans and wraps, and you've got, you know, 5 or 6 different components going on with the funding budget issues in Concord. Who's paying for that? Is that just coming from the taxpayer, or is Saint-Gobain on some of that?
No, from going all the way back to 2016, we log our time. All of us who work on the project log our time specifically to that, and we have we've had for a number of years a pretty well established cost recovery program, because we do that on a number of sites. And so we do send periodic quarterly invoices to them, which they do pay.
Good to hear. Amy, do you have your hand up? Like,
I'm sorry, we can't hear you, Amy.
Sorry. Yeah, I don't know if the study or the email made it to your inbox. But I was asking about the scarification last month, and there was a kind of staticky connection, and so I wasn't able to hear all of it. But a recent study had shown that PFAS can actually penetrate 12 centimeters of concrete. And so I was wondering how the scarification, and in particular, truth be told, my husband's in civil engineering and landscape architecture, like scarification can actually increase the surface area of, you know, so I keep coming back to, like, why are we not removing the slab?
Yeah,
and building a beautiful park or a garden over it.
Well, I'm glad you raised that. That's a good question. So the purpose of the scarification, I think, was that the expectation, and people I think know, if anybody's worked with concrete, they know it's not impervious. I mean, it's porous material. And so it can absorb contaminants, not just PFAS, but other things. And so I think the purpose of that relatively shallow surface layer scarification was to get the most contaminated portion of the concrete and remove it for disposal, to try to get to something that's a little cleaner. We've been talking with them about that, and we're still waiting to get some data on what that remaining concrete looks like. To the extent that it's left in place, there's been some talk that perhaps, and this has been done on other projects, where a 2-inch layer of concrete could be poured over it to seal that off. But one of the reasons that I think the company is not proposing to just tear out the foundation is that it is as I understand it, a remarkably substantial foundation. It was placed there when the original facility was solely purpose built to make turbines for a nuclear power plant. And so it actually had a rail car that would come in there. There were rails that run through the building. And so it's a very thick, several feet foundation slab, steel reinforced, that I think would be a very difficult job to pull that out of the ground. And not clear that really it would make any improvements at the site, because if you can say anything, it probably very effectively eliminates infiltration and precipitation within the footprint of the foundation. And so from our perspective, I mean, I don't want to be flip about it in any way, but even if you left it there untreated and just exposed to the elements, it probably doesn't mean much at all to the contamination of groundwater at the site, because we know there's already a lot of PFAS in the formation, both from air emissions that occurred right adjacent to the facility, or that deposited right adjacent to the facility, as well as more conventional releases of liquids that got into the formation. So the remedy that will have a meaningful impact on groundwater concentrations there or soil concentrations is either going to be a combination of soil removal and perhaps pumping and treating of groundwater in that location. The concrete foundation there, with respect to impacts to soil and groundwater, I think we believe is not particularly going to be meaningful. Having said that, we want to know what that looks like. And once the demolition is done and the scarification, whatever is going to be done is done, we're going to look at that, and we would be looking for either data that demonstrates that it doesn't pose any risk for surface water runoff, or lacking that, some kind of a further cap, such as pouring an additional layer of concrete over the top of that. So that remains to be seen. It's not something we're giving up on, but I think when we put it in the context of it has to be said, this is a significantly grossly contaminated site when it comes to PFAS. Mm-hmm. So our sense is that concrete foundation is kind of a sideshow.
Yeah, and Chris, may I have a follow on? I promise I'm not going to dominate. Sorry, I know we're at 4:05. I really appreciate this. But knowing that, so I did a little more digging, knowing that Saint-Gobain has spent 236 million euros to recover, remediate legal fees in New Hampshire, Maine, or New Hampshire, New York, and Vermont. I would love to understand how that fits into the calculus or the perspective of what it costs to remove the slab. If the slab is a cost, with just, or being able to make a site more beautiful, is that a rounding error on the 236 million euros that they've already invested?
I don't want to suggest for a moment that we really would like the slab to be removed. First of all, I don't think we can call it a slab. It's really it's a very detailed, complex, deep foundation. It's not just like a concrete slab.
Okay, foundation.
But secondly, I don't want to suggest for a moment that we really wish it could come out, but we're not asking because we think it's too expensive. We actually don't think, based on what we haven't made our final decision yet, but based on what we know about the site and what we've learned so far, it's not clear to us that put it this way, let's say it costs $3 million for them to remove that foundation.
Right.
I would much rather they spend that $3 million on a pump and treat system than on pulling out a foundation that we don't think has a meaningful impact on the quality, the soil or groundwater quality of the site.
Understood.
That's really what it's about. And we're asked to make those value judgments every day. Whenever we're evaluating a remedial action plan, we want to make sure that whatever money is being spent is getting the most bang for the buck in terms of reduction of contaminants and reduction of risks to human health and the environment. So that's really what
Thank you
drives.
very much for clarifying. I really appreciate that, because I think I thought you had said that it would be a significant effort to remove the concrete or
I believe it would
foundation.
be. Yeah,
So
that is also true. Yeah.
I wanted to make sure like we were on the same page about significance and the investment that they've already made so far in these areas. And, you know, they were awarded being one of the top 20 most sustainable companies by Wall Street Journal. So I'm sure they have this interest in mind, being able to clean up this site and being able to install something more beautiful and continue to test, you know, continue to be the good steward. You know, it sounds like this would be in line with their mission if they were to completely remediate the area and be able to leave something behind for the residents that were impacted.
Can I say something? This is Nancy. To Amy's point, I would think, and I'm speaking for impacted citizens in Merrimack, and I probably for other surrounding communities, despite anything in print or otherwise, I don't think you have anybody here that would say that they've been good stewards of the environment. And the cost to clean up the mess that they created, no matter how high, it wouldn't be necessary had they not engaged in production practices that they did without the protections that would have benefited and protected the communities that are still here living with the outcome of those decisions. So I mean, I know I'm preaching to the choir in many ways, but this is a real huge issue for the community here. And I know people ask and say, why is that foundation there? And, you know, yeah, we hear that, you know, they're striating the foundation, but all that's doing is sending stuff up into the air and leaving the stuff where the striations aren't. So what are they, you know, what are they really doing? So I think part of what Mike shared is helpful for us to share when, you know, when in the community, when we're asked these kinds of things. But we heard in 2018 that that Saint-Gobain was a good steward of our community, and I think that's bothered all of us here. And would, you know, again, I'll go on record as saying I don't believe, based on the comments that we've heard here, that that's indeed a fact. So that's all. I know nobody needs to respond. I just wanted to say that. Thank you.
I want to just piggyback on Nancy. When you talk about the amount spent, it's on record, Amy, and you're right, it's an immense amount of money, but the lion's share of that money has been spent in New York, second in Vermont, and by far less in New Hampshire. Now, I'm not going to minimize the impacts to Hoosick Falls area, and they have shared responsibility. They have 2 polluters in that area, and to Bennington, Vermont. But I can tell you, if you look at what those residents have in an area that is smaller footprint compared to this immense 9 communities that we're talking about, there's no comparison. They have damages, they have medical monitoring, they have circular Superfund sites, they have clean water sources, not poets, they have what we don't have. In New Hampshire, you know, we've done a great job on the limited resources, but there's this persistent philosophy in the state to do it the New Hampshire way. And part of me likes that, and part of me says, well, we didn't harness the power of the federal government at times when the federal government would have stood up for us. And by standing on our own, we've used more time, more resources, and they have done this. We know they lied about the PFOA, that's on record. And I want everybody here to keep in mind and watch out. There is a book coming out on May 6th or so by an author called Mariah Blake called They Poisoned the World. 8 years she has spent working with Hoosick Falls story and the backstory of PFOA in particular and PFAS, going back to the Manhattan Project. I've read a galley of it. It is phenomenal. It is readable with the technical backstory. It isn't like bogged down there. And when I read that book, I had to put it down at times, looking at the injustices and looking at the harm there that is on record, and the harm here that is really not on record in Saint-Gobain has never acknowledged the connection between exposure and outcome. When this book comes out, Wendy and I are working on getting the author here to do an author talk. Please look for this book. It is so powerful and it's well cited. There's a couple references in the footnotes to DES's work, by the way, that's great, but you won't just be struck by the book. You will really, what you know of our story in this 9-town area, when you read this story, you're going to make those comparisons and everybody is going to be furious all over again. So heads up, but watch for that book, but watch what we're saying about them. You know, environmental sustainability is a huge trigger to all of us at Merrimack. You know, I mean, I literally had a high heart notification on my watch when that word was said. So
I'm sorry.
that's okay. It's happened before. So.
I'm going to move
And
it because it is getting late. Anything more for Mike? If not, Representative Mooney, could you briefly update us on any happenings at the legislature we should be aware of?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. 2 bills on our commission bill tracker. The first, House Bill 199, is actually up for a vote in the full House next Thursday. That's an act eliminating the statute of limitation on civil actions related to damage caused by PFAS. The other bill, House Bill 167, will be exec in House Commerce next week. That's it.
Right.
So actually, it was exec this week, and it came out of committee with a unanimous vote.
Which was what? What was the unanimous vote?
I don't. However many. I thought it was like 12-0, but or maybe it was 12-1. I think Keith Amen voted against it, but it's been exec. The motion is OTP with the majority of the committee, and it's I don't know when it's going to be scheduled.
Okay, then that docket needs to be updated because the last it reads is that it'll be exec on the 19th.
Yeah, no, it was this week. I was up there for it.
Okay, that's good news.
Yep.
All right.
So that
unless there is anything else, I'm still going to take suggestions for different meeting time, but so far it looks like it will continue to be at 2 p.m. on Fridays. So our next meeting date will be April 11th of 2025 at 2. And so thank you everyone for staying with us. Very informative meeting. So we'll see you next time.
all right. Goodbye, all.
Bye, everybody.